number of folks in here. Let's commence the meeting for NAIOP Public Policy on March 13th, the Thursday before Leprechaun's Day, St. Patty's Day too, I guess they say. Hopefully your circadian clocks have been adjusted and looks like most of you guys are here on time, so that's good. Today is we'll be discussing kind of really in-depth meat and potatoes legislation that's funneling its way through the various chambers at the Capitol. And so it'll be good. There's definitely a handful of bills out there that we are tracking, and even beyond the small handful that we'll talk about too, that will show you. So we'll let you know what we know. But some of you might be tracking other stuff as well that we would love to talk about at the end of the meeting and see how we can help and ultimately make a change for the industry, which is why we're here. So, with that, before we always start, Stephanie, do you have would love to highlight some other programs that are happening? I think there's a good one next week.
Yes. So a week from today, we have a breakfast program about economic development. So that's at Golden Valley, like all of our other breakfast programs. Then the University Challenge is 4 weeks from today, coming up on April 10th. And then coming days, we'll be opening up project registration for the Awards of Excellence building competition. So,
Awesome.
yeah.
Um, and then Roz, I figured you've been doing a lot with Donovan and Phaedry, our lobbyist, and for some of you that are new in here, Roz is our public policy director. So why don't you give us an update as to some of your comings and goings?
Thanks, Sean. Yes, we've been meeting with all kinds of legislators, both in the House and the Senate, focusing primarily on the tax committee, but also commerce and any other areas that anybody's willing to listen to us. But we're bringing up the important impact that commercial real estate has on the state of Minnesota. For example, we provide $10 billion in GDP to our economy. We have about $3.1 billion in wages and benefits and almost 50,000 jobs. And the issues that we're discussing are primarily about reducing the state general levy, which is on commercial and industrial properties and is on top of all the local taxes that we pay at a higher tax rate as well. And seeing how we can not only educate them about this issue and show that Minnesota is an outlier, and also educate them on some of the research that we've done in the past, saying if we remove the state general levy, it would take us out of like the top 10 highest tax property taxes in the country to about the median or about the middle of the pack. So the other issues that we are working on is the CUB credit, the catalyst for underutilized buildings, which is an economic development tool to add credit to buildings that are repurposed and have an adaptive reuse that would work in any kind of product type, not just housing, but and it would be a 30% tax credit. So that has been heard in the House, and it is moving along through the process. And then the other one is we're opposing land value tax districts that maybe Donovan can get into more of the details of that. And then looking at the tax appeal process and making sure that the data that is provided to our county assessors remains private when it should be. Right now, there's sort of a glitch in the legislation where that information can become public. And then all of your competitors know all of the lease terms of your buildings with their expiration dates and how much money you paid. So it's a really kind of onerous thing just because you're appealing your property taxes. And also talking about with the clean energy initiatives that are passed, and as we're moving forward, that we should look at all clean energy initiatives and why we're supportive of lifting the nuclear ban. So that is it in a nutshell. And I know that Donovan's been working hard along, and Dave has joined us as well, setting up meetings and talking to folks and working on getting legislation moving forward and bad legislation stopping. So Donovan, I'll let you take it from here.
Thanks, Roz. And I'm going to share my screen here real quickly. We got a little presentation.
Could I just jump in?
Yeah,
I'm
go ahead,
sorry,
Sean.
Donovan. I forgot one important announcement. In the chat, I am going to have a link in here. That link will take you to the what's this website called again? This is called the Minnesota Legislature. Um, all you have to do is what we'd like to do is update records on our public policy members, and primarily what we're trying to find out is who represents you. So we don't necessarily need your home address, but that's why I'm sending you this link, and if you can go in there and type in either the city or the address, it'll pop up who represents you. Primarily, what we're looking for is your House representative and your Senate representative for the state of Minnesota. And then, as we'll talk about later on in this meeting, we we've had more than a handful of meetings with various legislators, and we're going to continue to have those throughout the session so that we can make our voice heard. And I think it's very important that these people hear from actual constituents. So this is an important piece of our public policy. So if you could go on that website, that'd be great, and let Steph know who your House representative and Senate representative is for the state. We would very much appreciate that. Um, we're not we're not going to sign you up for anything, but to the extent that we have a meeting lined up with that legislator, we would certainly ask you to join us on that Zoom call. And these meetings typically last anywhere from 10 to 15 minutes, and it's just updating them as to who you are, and what you do in the industry, and if you have a particular topic of concern. Donovan and Roz and or me are typically on those calls as well. So to the extent that you don't necessarily want to do a lot of talking, you don't need to either. We can kind of take it from there, but just having someone in their constituency is an important thing. So I will continue to remind you guys every meeting. So with that, thanks for giving me that time, Donovan. Go ahead.
Of course. Can you see that, Sean? Good. And I'm just gonna just touch. I know we're kind of kicking the animal here, I guess is what you might say, or cetera. But I just want to add, I think we've had about 14 meetings with Roz and other with our legislators. Um, I just want to reiterate too, to Sean's point, is a lot of them, especially on the House Tax Committee, are in their first term or second term, both at the legislature and on taxes. So, what we're seeing with a lot of these meetings are just providing them information and letting them know we're a resource, and getting a very good reception on both sides of the aisle, actually, on some of the issues we're working on. So, to Sean's point, anytime constituent, a voter in the district, or someone who employs people in their district can join us, that'd be very helpful. So, with that, I'm going to spend most of the time talking about the legislature, giving a quick update as we're about halfway through right now. Um, and just kind of, and then again, like Sean said at the end, we got a few bills I want to highlight that are kind of moving. I think Draws did a great job so far. Um, but here's kind of a quick snapshot. So last Thursday, the legislature received an update from Minnesota Management and Budget Office. They're the ones who put together the forecast. So the new numbers are the surplus has now fallen to an estimated only $456 million surplus. So you can see there 160 million less than November. But again, the biggest factor is the out years have now grown a little bit more. So they're estimating the deficit to grow to about 6 billion. I've got a couple of slides that'll show that a little bit more in a minute, but those are really the two numbers that you're going to hear being thrown around for the rest of the legislature. So those are the numbers that they'll be using to put together their budget forecast, or their budget before June 30th. You'll hear we talk about May 19th is when the session is constitutionally required to adjourn. But I'll get into that a little bit more, but they technically have till June 30th before the government would ever go into shutdown. But again, a lot of this is being driven by inflation. Just as a reminder, the 2023 legislature included inflation into the forecast, where before it was just a number that that they put basically on the bottom to let you know what it might be, but now it's a little bit more formal. And then there's still a lot of concerns, uncertainty, I should say, not maybe concerns, but more uncertainties about what Congress and the president are going to do at the federal level. A lot of that was still left outside this forecast because there hasn't been much confirmed that they can do, and they can't really hypothesize what the federals will do. So here's the best way I like to try to explain this to everybody. So it might look a little confusing, but even though we have a surplus of 456 million, if you see right here in this first column, it's showing you really what the revenues and spending are. So you can see we've got a structural deficit to begin with. And that's something that they've known. They knew about it in 2024, the legislature, which is why the next slide will show you. They ended up leaving a lot of money on the bottom line, and this goes back to 2023 when they had roughly a $20 billion surplus. They knew this structural imbalance was coming, and then so they spent the vast majority of that, which was one-time money. But a lot of the things that they put in there ended up having larger tails than they thought. And so that's where you can see right here how the spending is outpacing revenue. The biggest thing that again, here's where you can draw the attention to the out years. Again, the positive news is the forecast revenues are growing. So I mean, that's a positive, but again, spending is definitely outpacing the revenue estimates that are coming in. And then again, as you can see here, this is where they have included inflation. So they're what they call discretionary inflation, because it's kind of interesting that now that they put inflation into the forecast, they're saying, well, they technically don't have to pay it until it impacts the forecast, which would be throughout the biennium. So if you take that away, they'd have technically, if you didn't include inflation in this year's forecast, they'd have about a $1.6 billion surplus instead of a 456.
So can I just jump in here? Yeah. So on the discretionary inflation number, this was something the legislature did in 2023 during the trifecta that Democrats wanted. Previously, they did not have that discretionary inflation in the forecast on the expenditure side. So as Donovan said, if with that one accounting change, you would have a surplus of 1.145 billion, and it also significantly would decrease the $6 billion deficit in the out years. So I think as the budgeting process goes forward, it'll be interesting to see if they revisit this issue because its impacts, relative to spending programs and other things, or whether Democrats continue to want to hold on to this. Because this wasn't something Republicans thought was a good idea to put the expenditure side on an automatic inflator, and it's exacerbating the current budget picture.
So here's the snapshot that MMB always provides, and so it's like I said, it makes the other chart look a little easier to read, but again, here you can see in this very first column, this is what they left on the bottom line. A lot of it's one-time money. So, I mean, if they would have spent any of that in 2024 last year, their surplus that they have this year was all based on them not spending last year. Part of that is why the numbers, you can hear Democrats and Republicans talking similar numbers, but you can see in order to get just the $6 billion, they're assuming that they're not going to spend 456 million this year. So it's technically it'd be a little over 6. It's like 6.2 is the true, and you can see that on the previous slide, is actually the true revenue and inflationary impact. And so to Dave's point, like this is basically what this is saying to us and the legislators. And I think Roz, you've heard it a number of times too, as we're meeting with people. They don't really have any money, so they know they got to be looking at reducing spending some way, somehow, and in that way, and looking at scaling back. A lot of this is being driven. I think they have it coming up, but a lot of the increases in inflation and spending here is being driven by healthcare costs. Um, and that's interesting enough as I saw a stat the other day that said about 80 million to 90 million increased costs were actually coming from the new, in essence, weight loss drugs being covered by health plans now. So, the diabetes medicine that's helping people lose weight. So, um, with every forecast, there's risks, concerns. So, kind of touched on a couple of these, like, the first one, we've already heard about potential tariffs on Canada and other countries. Immigration is going to be an impact for jobs in Minnesota, energy policies. Again, they can't when they forecast if it's talked about as an issue at the federal level, they can kind of forewarn the risk, but they can't calculate that in. I mean, it's got to be something that is actually almost concrete, basically going to the president for a final sign off on before they can actually include it. So again, like disruptions in federal agency closures, contract suspensions, these are all things that we're hearing from the federal level with them trying to, what they say in clean up government, tighten government spending. We'll see what that means. At the end of 2025, if you remember back in 2017, the federal government passed the Tax Cuts and Jobs Acts, the TCJA. The first round of them, they had a lot of those benefits expiring in 2025. So technically, at the end of this year, they will be expiring, coming off the books. So there's a lot of question is, will they extend a lot of those business tax cuts, corporate tax rate cuts and stuff like that?
Yeah. And so just on the federal policy, I think folks might have saw that Congress passed this budget resolution that people are arguing about whether and how it impacts Medicaid. And I think that debate underscores what Donovan is saying, that while MMB can't include it in its forecast because, whatever Congress is going to do hasn't happened yet, they are signaling kind of concern. And the reason they are is that in this fiscal year, roughly 1/3 of the total revenue the state spends comes from the federal government. So in this fiscal year, they spent $119 billion. 1/3 of that was federal, and 56% of that number is entitlement spending. So, for example, on the Medicaid front, if later this year there were to be significant cuts to Medicaid at the federal level, that has state implications for the budget, among other things. And policymakers would have to figure out whether to plug the hole, whether to conform to Medicaid, or whether it be a combination. Even some of the Republican members of the House and Senate are concerned. They sent a letter prior to the vote to all members of the federal delegation raising concerns about it. But I think for our purposes, we expect to be engaged throughout the entire year at the legislature, regardless when they get a budget, because of federal state interplay and what that could mean for blowing holes in any budget that is ultimately agreed to. So,
yeah, and just to piggyback on what Dave's saying, there's again, like we have to have a balanced budget in place for the next biennium for 26-27 by July 1st. But that's what Dave's saying too, is if they come in and they mess with our numbers and throw us out of whack, we'll have to come back for a special session and address that. And so I think us at the Capitol, like I said, they have till May 19th, and we're pretty sure they're going to probably go till June 30th with a special election, or not election, special session to come back in and finalize a deal. So the other biggest thing, especially with any forecast, there's still 28 months until the end of the biennium that we're projecting for. So, a lot can happen during that time. So, that's probably one of the bigger ones for me is that and the federal level. Just, after the first year, we'll probably have a better idea what Congress and the president might be doing. So here's what Dave was touching on. He beat me to the punch. This is again, just showing the federal impacts. So like Dave said, they've been talking about cuts to the states. So just want to put that up there. We don't really know what it'll do, but again, the state is required to, if there's Medicaid funding cuts, the state's required to fill that hole back up. So that's part of what Dave's saying, and I was reiterating that they might have to come back in September to address that if that were to happen. So that's just kind of a quick slide to show what federal monies we have.
Donovan, go back on that slide. Do we, on the all other sources, is, do you know, is a lot of that with, education aid or just out of curiosity, like, what are we talking about for that big piece that could potentially have cuts?
Well, that's going to be these are your revenue sources, not your spending sources.
Right, right.
So this is going to be like income taxes, corporate taxes, I mean sales taxes. Those are all going to be included over in the other sources. Dedicated funds that are in there too.
Oh, so this is the total state
Total.
revenues.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
This is just the revenue side, yes.
Okay, so on the, okay, sorry. So on this
So
green piece here, what else, like, what are some other functions that the federal funds in our state? Just out of curiosity.
Yeah, I know, and Dave, if you can help me,
yeah,
maybe there.
I can respond to that
Yep.
if you want. So federal funds for transportation, about 3.1 billion. Nutritional aid for kids, 1.6 billion, about 590 million for min care, and then other things like special education programs. So
That's a good memory. Wow.
uh, I have notes. but it's far beyond just the Medicaid piece, but Medicaid is the biggest piece of the budget picture in terms of how much money we get from the feds. But I mean, the transportation stuff too is some of that's road and bridge funding. Some of it's transit funding.
So I added this slide just quickly in here. And we can share the entire briefing booklet. I think is I don't know 50 pages long or something. We can definitely share that link in the chat or in their updated letter, Roz's monthly letter, if people want to see it. But here's just a little piece on the business impacts that they had in there. So I put it in there. You can see, you know, what they talked about in regards to the fixed investment. And then the one piece I wanted to put in here is the one comment they made about commercial industrial area in the briefing book. They don't talk anything else really about us in there, but I think everybody on this call knows this way better than I do. So it's something that actually when I read it and I had the chance to talk to Roz or Sean really about it, but it's probably another thing that we can talk to again as we're meeting with these legislators and reemphasize this is what that I'll get into it when we get to a bill in a couple of minutes here, as they're looking at different ways to incentivize, motivate us to, reinvest in buildings or fix up our buildings or make them more energy efficient. They're calling out that we're having a hard time getting investments for that. And there's even one bill, what I'll talk about here in a minute, that could be an issue for us. And that's how I walked right into that nicely. So, Roz touched on a lot of these very, very, very nicely. As Sean said, we have a bill tracker. Happy to share it with people how we need. I think on there, we're roughly tracking over about 30 bills, but it's actually probably realistically closer to 60 to 70. A lot of bills that have been introduced so far, there's been multiple versions. So, a lot of Republicans are dropping income rate reductions, corporate tax rate reductions. So, I'm kind of tracking them as a general whole. There's been over 2,000 bills introduced in both the House and Senate so far, and they keep introducing about 100 to 150 in both chambers, both on Mondays and Thursday, Friday. So, about 600 new bills are still coming in per week right now. But I think Roz did a great job with the Cub credit. I mean, I'm pretty sure Senator Russell gave that a hearing in the Senate. She heard it last year. Just a reminder what that is it gives a 30% credit for people who have a building that is over 15 years old, and they have vacant area or unused parts of it. In order to qualify for the credit, again, it has to be over 15 years old. You have to convert an area for a different purpose, and I think Mark, you might have asked this the other day or so. Over 50% of the property has to be vacant for 5 years. I don't, that's something that we can definitely look at changing maybe the 5 years or that. But the catch with this, again, and Roz says it best, as it works a lot like the historic rehabilitation tax credit. Obviously, different standards are set, but with this one, it has a $11 million price tag in the upcoming biennium, and then roughly a 60 million one in the tails. And the tails, again, is going to be the hardest factor for anything getting past this year. As you can see, like, we have a $6 billion deficit, so anything we put into that, it's going to be very difficult to get members to support that, because they're going to be looking at trying to curb that as much as possible. I think Roz touched on all the other ones. I do want to just let people know we introduced a bill, or we will be introducing a bill. I just got the bill jackets the other day, for reducing the state general levy by 32 million, or 32 million. Senator Jasinski from Faribault Albert Lee area has agreed to be our chief author in the Senate, and Representative Swedinsky has agreed to be our chief author in the House. Representative Robbins is another person that's very supportive. That's our hope there, is, again, just as they're considering anything, that we're being considered in some kind of relief too. Just because, as you can see, like, I'll go over the concerning area. There's probably, I don't know, a dozen bills or so that deal with different property tax shifts for increasing the market value exclusion for veterans and seniors. And so we've been very vocal when we meet with people that, the last couple of years, especially even with the trifecta, we took a bunch of these shifts on at the local levy, and everybody else got relief, and we didn't receive any sort of help for the most part in any area, but we're subject to more taxes. And so hoping that in the end, if at least if there is shifting, that they offset at least the state general levy, is what we've been able to do in the past, to at least, so it's a base, kind of more of a net neutral for us, that we're not getting any new taxes, especially as we're coming up there and testifying how we have open buildings. I want to back up for 1 second on the Cub credit. Right now, just so people know, when that's being talked about, a lot of people are talking about converting commercial to residential. The bill does not prohibit commercial to commercial, or commercial to any other use, but it is getting widely supported by the residential side as a potential way of getting, maybe more housing in downtown areas. But so we are monitoring that to make sure that it stays broad, that we can use conversion to either which one. And I know Sean be very happy if we could even get it back to being adaptive reuse instead of the Cub credit, but we're working on that. And but the one I do want to touch on, the governor proposed broadening the sales tax base. I think it's got weak support at the Capitol by both sides of the aisle. The Dems are kind of talking at it, at least the ones I've been meeting with are kind of talking about it as in, it's not a new tax, since we already have sales taxes, and it's more of a fairness that, we tax a bunch of services, but not all services. So the ones that'd be adding it to are attorneys, accountants, financial services, those types. And I think the one big thing with them is the ones that I've met with, the lobbyists that I know that represent them, and I think a lot of people on here would likely say too, is those are a lot of professions where they're just going to pass it on to the customer, and the customer is going to be the one that's going to end up having to pay for it anyways.
I think on that point, for accountants, lawyers, other services which is what it would be applied to. That broadening of the base actually raises more revenue than the reduction that the Walz administration has proposed reduces. So, I think on the Republican side, there's very little appetite because they see it as a new tax and a revenue raiser. Uh, and to Donovan's point about Democrats, I think that's tough. So especially some of the lawyers in the Senate don't think that it's a good idea to be broadening the sales tax. I think the bigger, I think the issue for those folks is what happens if the feds, blow a big hole in the budget and whatever. How do they deal with it? I think that's at least in the conversations I've had, the reason it hasn't been a hard no, because it started out as a hard no with some of the blue dog Democrats in the Senate. But then, as things have evolved, I think they've softened some and want to take a wait and see attitude with respect to how much more the budget picture deteriorates.
If I could interject, that that is a very concerning and adds a lot of cost to our industry because we rely heavily on attorneys and accountants to figure out, as part of our business. And if we're going to have to pay like a 9% sales tax, or it's almost 10% in Minneapolis on our attorney bills and our accounting bills, it certainly is going to impact our bottom line. And don't forget, all these people pay income taxes. In a lot of other states, there's no income tax, and maybe they have a broadened sales tax concept, but we have high income taxes here as well. And if you get a $5,000 bill, it's a pretty big number.
Right. And to that point, I mean, I think part of how the Walz administration has tried to position this is it's taxing the wealthy, but the Bar Association has characterized it as a misery tax because the reality is, middle class people get divorced too. Middle class people have the draft wills too, and this tax would apply to all of it. I think, now that we have divided government in the House, I think it's less likely to make it to the end. I don't see, Davids and House Republicans going for that, and you're going to need bipartisan support. But I think in the Senate, there is support, but there is a select group of moderates who are also mindful of all the taxes they raised last time and are also on the ballot now too. So maybe a little bit more, a little bit more concerned about, political impacts than they might have been in their first term. Donovan, I don't know if we want to talk about process of what we see next. Is that next?
I think that's next. Go ahead,
Yeah.
Mark.
Yeah, I was just saying, just quickly, back to the point around the reduction for the general levy by 32 million. How was that number derived? Was that based on some offset?
Sean and Roz and Dave and I talked about it, talked about it. In the past, we'd always been asking for a removal of the whole levy. So the whole levy is still 716 million on the CI side. And, part of the idea was we know we're not going to get that. We talked about maybe introducing a $50 million one. And what we came up with was, generally at the Capitol, what you ask for, you get about half of it. And so our hope would be like this would be a way of showing like if we were able to get the 60 million, that would get us under 700 million. And that's, since 2017 when we took the inflator off, and that levy at that time was about 834. So we have been able to make some progress. And the idea was to keep trying to pick away at it, knowing they don't really have any money right now to do any substantial. We talk about it as in the whole point of removing it and getting rid of it. It's just we try to pick a number that be small enough that they might be willing to consider, but that would still have an impact to our people.
Yeah. I mean, incremental progress towards having it eliminated. It is also by having the bill there, it's an opportunity to highlight the issue for tax committee members as they're starting to move towards decision making on the budget.
Well, definitely would be a great way to open the door if they accept it.
Yeah.
Yeah, when we met with Jasinski and I can't remember the other, but they were both concerned just given the outlook. They were supportive to introduce a bill to eliminate it completely, but they're like, well, let's focus on what's potentially realistic this year. And they said, there is a chance we could get something done just on a smaller level, and let's keep this at the forefront. So that was another reasoning too. The This was a suggestion by the authors as well. So
And I'll just add to that just quickly, is I have it here. Um, there is a bill that's already introduced regarding the state general levy. It's a Senator Crewin bill. He's up by the Blaine area. I put it under here under a concerning, because what that bill's looking to do is offset fiscal disparities, and it's looking to give a town of Columbus, who doesn't really have any commercial properties, a little more state aid, because then they also don't qualify for LGA. I put it under here as concerning just because, as I've told Ross and I've told Sean, like, if that were to happen, and I understand their concern in that, but once we start dedicating this money again to different areas, I don't think we're going to be able to get rid of it entirely. So that's just wanted to flag that one on there. And
And
there's
that's a
one.
general, yeah, and that's a general fund appropriation. So Columbus happens to be, I think, the only net contributor in Anoka County, who are, in the county and those cities tend to be recipients under the program. So I think, part of it is, in addition to take general fund impact, that every, city in the South Metro, who are almost all net contributors, would then come in and say, well, then give us a general fund appropriation too. And I think Kroon is trying to respond to, I know Kroon is trying to, because I've talked to him about it, to respond to, his constituents. But I think the good news for us is he also understands, that you start pulling at this thread the wrong way, it creates way more problems than he wants to solve. So I think, we continue to monitor that, but thinking that won't make it to the end.
We'll speed up a little bit to save plenty of time for questions, but there's one more actually here. I do want to flag that I didn't update my sheet in time. It actually was introduced on Monday in the House. It's getting a hearing this afternoon, and it's revising the definition of a lobbyist again. It's a Representative Nash bill. Now he's changing the dollar amount, so it's a much higher dollar number that you need to qualify under. But he does have the language in there last year that we were supportive of, that basically said, if you do this for your, a day-to-day job, if you're an expert in this field, if you're doing this to provide your services, just, at the local level, you would be exempted. So we'll be tracking that hearing this afternoon. It'll be interesting to see what kind of support it has. Because I know we did have some Democrats that were supportive of keeping that, that kind of professional language that would exclude, I think, a lot of our members from having to have those concerns again. So it hasn't been introduced yet in the Senate, but like I said, it was just introduced and got scheduled quickly. So we'll be supporting that one. So here's kind of, Dave, to your point, what's next. So Dave touched on it briefly, and I probably should have said it right at the beginning. There is the special election on Tuesday. That was for the Roseville seat. The Democrat won that, as was projected for the most part. So the House is now officially 67. Basically, right after that happened, leadership from the Democrats and the House, or the Democrats for sure, but the House also responded, is that they are now working the committees as, in essence, a conference committee. They'll be rotating gavels in the House. So there'll be one Republican gavel or chair and one Democrat chair, and the committees are all back to being 50-50 membership on both sides, except for the Fraud and Waste Committee stays Republican gavel with a 5-3 majority vote. We're still not sure how that's going to fully work. I've heard different things, and I'll let Dave comment then too.
Yeah.
I've heard different things that they might pass out two versions of their omnibus bill, you know, a Republican one and a Democrat one to send both to the floor. I think it's going to depend on how the two chairs actually work and get along together. If they can actually put together, in essence, a, a conference committee report. But Dave, if you want to
Yeah,
go.
I mean, under the power sharing agreement that broke the impasse, now that it's 67-67, as Donovan said, committee membership is now even except for the fraud committee, but you need a majority of the votes in the committee, which means you need a bipartisan support to move a bill. So I think, but there isn't a lot more direction beyond that in the rotating gavels. Depending on what committee it is, I think some committee co-chairs could decide, hey, we're only going to hear bills that have bipartisan support. Others might decide that they want to use their day to highlight their caucus's priorities, even though they may not go anywhere. It'll be interesting to see how each committee decides to move forward. I think the more important issue is the House and Senate budget targets, particularly in the House. And what those are now that they know what the budget picture is going to look like, the budget targets are basically direction to the tax and spending committees about how much they can spend on issues in their area that allow them to make decisions to move omnibus bills and tax bills. Now, usually when you don't have divided government, the majority caucus in each body makes those decisions. And I'm not discounting, I think there'll be difficulty in the Senate getting budget targets, but the real difficulty is going to be in the House because it's evenly divided 67-67. There are significant differences between the House and Republicans and House Democrats, not only on the size and scope of government, but what their spending priorities should be within individual areas. You see some of those lines that being drawn late last week in the context of the forecast. Republicans in particular are pointing to the fact that, the trifecta spent a significant surplus and raised taxes $9 billion. So they're going to want to reduce, I think, the size of government, which 2 bienniums ago was in the low $50 billion range and now is closer to 70. So, significant increase. But their ability to reach a budget target, I tend to be more pessimistic about these. I'd be shocked if the House had a budget target anytime soon, and definitely not before April. For those reasons, it's going to be a very difficult decision, and somehow they're going to have to agree. And the committees really can't get to work on passing, budget bills until the House agrees. I know there was some talk. One of our colleagues, Megan Hennon, had been talking to folks, and I think there's some, concern on the House side about, even negotiating with House Democrats and instead trying to move towards joint targets. And while this is a little in the weeds, I think it's important for the end of session because, what generally happens is each body passes budgets based on their budget targets, and then they get together and negotiate joint budget targets. So if you're the Republicans in the House, if you go through that process and negotiate budget targets with the House, then you have to kind of go after that and negotiate with the governor and the Senate, which are DFL. One way to circumvent that would be to work with Senate Republicans and demanded, that joint, they agree to overall budget targets now. That's at least not happening for now, and the Senate's going to move forward with their own budget targets. But it's going to be a very difficult negotiation, which is not only going to impact the third deadline, but impact their ability to get a budget before they adjourn on May 19th or even June 30th. As the slide says, and Donovan said earlier, if they can't agree to a budget by June 30th, government shuts down. And, we can talk about this more at future meetings, but the last time there was a government shutdown, the Supreme Court basically changed the standard for what a shutdown means. before you'd have special masters looking at, essential services and those kinds of things, and those could continue. But what that Supreme Court decision says is, hey, a shutdown means a shutdown. That means there are no special services, exemptions, whatever. The legislature appropriates funds. And so I think, as we get closer into May and whatever, I think that gives more leverage to Republicans in terms of negotiating a budget deal. But it's going to be I think, a difficult and protracted negotiation over the next couple of months. I don't know, Donovan, if you want to add to that.
Yep. No, I think I've touched on really kind of the rest of these dates kind of going through. They're pretty standard, the thing that we've talked about in the past. So I think that was my last slide. So yes, I will stop there.
So real quick, so no delays in that June 30th deadline based on the delay of getting people back to work after the election, the special election? There wasn't any shift of that deadline to extend it for the House?
The June 30th deadline is the day the budget expires, so there's not flexibility to extend that deadline. They did move back the policy deadlines a week or two to reflect kind of the shutdown, but that was more on the policy side.
Okay.
The June 30th is a hard deadline. If they don't have a budget by then the government shuts down.
Okay. Another quick question. Under that fraud and waste committee, I guess, I mean, in the discussions about shrinking the size of the government growth, has there been any meaningful discussions around analyzing the office space usage of both, the St. Paul and Hennepin, Ramsey and Hennepin County offices that are sitting, working from home or whatever they might be? Are they looking at shedding any real estate to try to reduce the cost of upkeep?
My understanding, the most thing that they've been looking at is the feeding our future, and then there's another an overpayment from HHS that was about another 200 or 300 million dollars. So they're looking more like what's going on within there rather than the office space side. Basically what's happened underneath the trifecta, and trying to use that as a way of saying there wasn't good government oversight. I know there's a consideration of an Office of Inspector General that's kind of moving out there that has bipartisan support to try to rein in these big mistakes that are costing, I think the last time I heard during one of those hearings was the Republicans have estimated about $800 million in fraud and waste that has gone out in the last few years that they're trying to rein back in.
Okay. And I do think it'd be interesting to see how much of the space that they're not using that's sitting dormant, but that's another day.
I think that's a great idea, Mark.
Aren't they selling some of that space at the federal level? Unused space?
Yes.
Yeah. That's something we can pay attention to as that committee moves forward.
Everyone else on this call, if you guys have questions on a specific bill or anything, I think this Cub credit is interesting. I don't know, how much traction it's going to get this year, just given the bipartisan, the good thing is that we do have divided legislature in some extent here, but this does carry a price tag, obviously, as to the way some of these legislators think about it. But in the chat, I did put the main qualifications in here. We're gonna work as we have these meetings, and I do want to highlight all the meetings that we've had or will have, to the extent that you guys can be helpful in those. But I think one of the things that while it doesn't exclude commercial buildings, the language really doesn't lend itself well to actually converting is a bad word, reusing old buildings. And I think the way that this is set up is the term conversion, and I think that will also imply if it's meant to do a conversion of use, there's going to be a lot more strings attached with zoning. And so that's another thing that I don't think that the people at Rethos or whoever's pushing this forward. So that's where we're going to be another voice in here. I mean, if you really want to make an impact downtown Minneapolis, I know Onward Investors is on here. I think Stephanie's on here. There's this language has to get tweaked and it has to be more um, broadened so that folks that make heavy investments like what Onward's trying to do at the Ameriprise Center, for example, can actually be incentivized to actually get those investments in. You shouldn't need to convert a building to reuse that building and put it back into production. The other thing I worry about is with the latest hearing, all of it was kind of focused on housing, and it's like we have to avoid this being just another housing subsidy, um, which is I feel like where it's going to kind of go down a rabbit hole if we don't really get involved. And so we are talking with legislators and voicing our concerns. So Donovan or Dave, so how does that work? Does an amendment to the bill happen, or like how do we broaden this? Like what, or Roz kind of chime in? Because if this does get traction, we do want to make this a little more feasible for the industry.
Well, one thing I'd
Go
change is
ahead.
that 5-year component. It shouldn't have to be vacant for 5 years. It should just have to be, vacant.
Right, at least 50%, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Agreed. I guess I was trying to think too around the uses that you could project, whether it is downtown or somewhere else. I mean, what are the typical ideas that you'd have? There's hotels, there's housing, there's entertainment uses, there's, public uses like libraries or other things. I'm just trying to think of all the uses that are not captured, that are realistic, that would add to the vitality of the area as well as be realistic to bring investment.
Yeah, no, that's when oh, what's her name? Came in and spoke about those downtown plans to us, to NAIOP,
Aaron Fitzgerald.
Aaron Fitzgerald. That's what the downtowns want, is that vibrant, kind of live, work, play, everyone being there. And this really would exclude a lot of that retail, the entertainment, the hospitality that really contributes to all those districts. So I think I think there's some work to do, and that's kind of and that's what we're here to do is to help make this a more viable bill for our members. So
Also something unique about the zoning, that does exclude that. I mean, you see a lot of mixed uses buildings already. We have main floor retail or combinations of hotels, and like in our building at the Gateway, we got a hotel, we got condos, and we have office space and retail. I mean, I don't know if that was some particular PUD zoning that had to happen, but most buildings seems like, again, I want to just focus downtown only because I know we want to be attractive to everybody out in the suburbs and the rural areas too, to reuse these buildings in a way that creates value. But it seems like a lot of these buildings already have maybe a built-in ability to be pretty flexible in use, but that'd be interesting to know for sure if there's exclusions that we're not aware of.
And then I did just want to pull up here just here's all the legislators that we've met with, and so it is a big list and it's growing. And these are primarily targeted, Donovan, to members of the tax committee. Is that right for now?
Yeah, we've been targeting the tax committee. We've had one meeting with leadership with Senator Mark Johnson. We do also have we're trying to get meetings with the energy chairs and in both bodies, and then Representative Demuth is on there as well. And then the other people that we probably need to add on there too now. Excuse me, is Senator Latz and Representative Scott from our data practices bill that Roz kind of touched on.
Yeah. So this is who we're meeting with, and this list will grow as bills make their way further down, and we have the ability. So when I sent out that link, that's by the district, we kind of want to ask members to attend if they're free. So that's really the purpose and where we're going with all of that. So
And I think you touched on there, Sean. We've been able to get at least almost all of these, I think, or maybe all of them so far have been virtual meetings. So we're not asking to come over the Capitol. It's just more, set aside a 15-minute call. I mean, most of them have been about 15 minutes long. Sometimes when they've been going good, we've been able to get a half hour out of them. But
yeah.
Like I said, I mean, we always plan for 15 and take what they can give us. But again, there's a couple of members, Senator Rest and Senator Klein, that they only meet in person, basically. But even like Chair Davids, we had him down and just he had to reschedule due to another conflict, whatever. But we'll be getting him back on there. That it's, you know, most have been more than willing and accepting, especially because I don't know if we've touched on it very much recently, but just as a reminder, the House actually are in a temporary housing space right now because the state office building is under construction, and that'll take roughly 3 years. So they're actually literally in cubicles in another building by the Capitol. So they don't even have their own office space. So virtual has been working out pretty well, actually.
Well, we're getting close to time here. Any other last questions, concerns, other bills that you guys are hearing about? I'll just open the floor here for a minute or two. Okay. Well, I will, that's a good point to end the meeting a little early here. Roz, am I missing anything?
Well, I just had one question, and that is it's more of a guess, I guess, but a lot of what happens in the legislature is about personalities and relationships. And I just want to ask Donovan and Dave if they feel that, what happened with all the drama in the House, has that kind of made relationships even more strained? And then also, I want to know, like, eventually the governor has to weigh in on these things. And I mean, do you think the governor would actually veto any legislation that came to his desk?
I can take a run at it. I think, I think there are hard feelings, and I think it goes beyond what's happened recently. I mean, if you go back to the end of last session, there wasn't a lot of outreach from Democrats in the House or Senate to Republicans. So I think there were hard feelings on the Republican side at the end of last session. I think the holdout didn't do, or the boycott didn't do any favors. So I don't think, having said that, I think, more than others, the Speaker Demuth and I guess Speaker Emeritus Ortman, I think that's the title they gave her, have generally had a pretty good relationship. So I think that's a positive. Surprisingly, I think that, David's, while they have vast policy disagreements, Representative Davids seems to have a cordial relationship with Aisha Gomez, the co-chair, and a very good relationship with the Senate tax chair. So I think there are some of those individual relationships that will offset some of that. But I think as we get beyond the adjournment date and closer to a shutdown, hopefully we'll focus people on trying to avoid that. In terms of a veto, the governor has only vetoed a couple bills when there has been significant impacts. Uber, Lyft, when they threatened to leave the state. The other one was Mayo when. So, he not a lot of vetoes. Of course, that's a little different environment. With the trifecta, my guess is I don't expect to see a lot of vetoes. He seems to be preoccupied also with other things. I think he's in Iowa and Ohio today. that doesn't seem super related to what's going on in Minnesota, but I'll let people judge that for what it is. But I don't think there'd be, I don't expect there to be a lot of vetoes, if any. I don't know, Donovan, what you
Yeah, I'll
think?
just add quickly because I know we're running over now. The only thing I would say different or add to Dave's comments is that everybody's expecting this year, whatever agreement is going to come for a budget, it's going to be cuts of some sort. It's just how big are the cuts. So it's not like they're fighting over which spending agreements. They know that basically, even Democrats I've talked to have even acknowledged, like, yeah, agencies are probably taking minimally a 5% cut off each budget. I mean, it's what we call basically a lights on budget where it's you just kind of hold funding right where it is and make some minor cuts, but there's no real new spending. And I think that takes a lot of the pressure off of finding agreement because it's just what can we barely scrape by with. And the one thing I didn't say on the list, I should add it in one of my sheets there, just as a friendly reminder too. I mean, the state does have roughly a little over $3.5 billion in their cash reserve, rainy day fund, and cash flow count. But
Mm.
leadership on both sides of the aisle and the governor have said they don't really want to tap into that because they're more worried about that for the out biennium. So just forgot to have that in one of my slides.
That makes sense.
Do you mind if I throw in a question real quick on the Cub credit?
Sure.
Uh, I'm a local developer here looking at a few projects that would certainly be impacted by the Cub credit. And I'm pretty disheartened by, I guess, the updates and I guess lack of progress in terms of where it stands, understandably knowing what's going on politically. But is there a real clear communication of the economic positives that would come from this program? You know, I know there's a cost on the tax credit side, but this is the type of program that could literally turn around the downtown within a couple years. And I just wonder if there's, if there's anything that we can do in the community to, put forth examples or people, individuals we need to reach out to help explain it. Any of that stuff would be really helpful.
Yeah, no, I will say that I know that both Senate Chair and at least Republican House Chair Davids are very supportive of it. Um, they know the economic benefits, and actually Senator Ress is one. There's a few other issues that are going around the Capitol that are about the same thing about how a little bit of investment from the state can economically turn around a lot of areas or get people back working. Um, the catch with that is, unfortunately, some of the Minneapolis, I'm going to call them Minneapolis left, but the Aisha Gomez ones, all they care about is that's money to government or business instead of money to helping poor people or people that are struggling. So I think anything that you can do to reach out to your local official, elected officials, sharing information with them, even if it's just a quick email, it means a lot more to them even if it's sad to say, but it means a lot more to them than Dave or Roz or I actually do because I mean, like I said, it's your word, even if it's just like even a 2 sentence email that those stick in their heads a lot better than especially like a form email. So I think any extended or any help that you can be to keep kind of reaching out with updates on like, hey, these we've seen this happen in other areas of the nation or any examples are always very helpful about the economic, because that's the big thing that I know a lot of people are touting around there right now. Are what are economic benefits to try to get Minnesota out of that deficit in the out years?
Yeah, I agreed, especially Aisha Gomez, because this affects her district a lot, and she does not understand how economic development tools work.
Yeah, and she's been stonewalling us. I mean, we've requested many
Yeah.
meetings with her, and we've just been hand to the face, So, Chad, it's anyone in this meeting or your friends, like, I don't know if you guys have city council members in your district, in your ward that can, you can CC emails to her because that's ultimately how I mean, I see that getting through to her. And she's a big hurdle. I mean, she's the tax chair of the House. So
And maybe just add real quickly, I know we're over, but Chad, if you've got connections with, other leadership people in especially the DFL side, like Leader Long or Speaker Hortman, I mean, when we've met with them, before, they know that they've got people that are in their caucus that they need to also kind of put their foot down and help them find the right way out of this in the end. And my polite way of saying that they know, like, their ideals can't always stand up when they're putting together a final budget to get out and make sure people aren't left unemployed July 1st.
well, if someone wants to keep order in this committee, I'm gonna call this meeting to an end, guys. So, Chad, I appreciate the questions and Roz, the comments and everything. So, next month, are we highlighting anything next month?
We'll give you an update on budget negotiations.
Yeah.
Spoiler alert, they won't have targets.
Special session, right?
Yeah.
We might have another speaker come in. I can't remember who we've thrown around or whatnot, but we might have a special guest next month. But either way, just a good way to start your day. So
Yeah.
thank you guys for attending with us today and uh, keeping us and the industry front and center at the legislator. So
Thanks,
you
Sean.
guys have a good
I was
day.
just going to
Thank
say,
you.
sorry, and I'm traveling next week, but if anybody who's on the call here is able to make that meeting next week on economic development, I think it's timely, with the representatives from Deed and Minneapolis being there in Scott County, I think it'd be great. So anybody who can make it next week, please do.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Doug. Yep.
Thank you.
See you guys.
Everyone.
Bye.